Chapter 7 takes us through daily operations, the day-to-day stuff that we have to do as managers, and how we go and divide our time to make sure we're getting the most bang for our buck. So we need to determine what is our priorities, because yes, everything is a priority, but there are certain priorities that are more priority than others, if that makes sense. All tasks are important to do, but we need to determine when we get them done, what order we got to get them done in. And so we look at the operation and base our priorities on what the goals of the operation are and how important they are compared to other tasks. And last but not least, how urgent that task needs to be completed. So number one priority would be important tasks that are very urgent. And then we have important tasks that are not urgent. Then you have urgent tasks that are not important, but something needs to be done. And then you have the ones that are not important or urgent. Those are your number 4, your last of your priorities. So you've got to determine, okay, what's the importance of this and what's the urgency? How fast does it need to be done? From there, you can then start to prioritize what jobs need to be done, what tasks need to be completed in what order to make sure you get them done in the appropriate amount of time. Another thing we have to do is, again, look at policies for the establishment. I've talked about this in other chapters. I've talked about standard operating procedures. I've talked about policies, and I've referred to them, but we've never really looked at what a policy is, what a standard operating procedure is, things along those lines, or job descriptions. That's what this chapter is about, is, the work that you do on a regular basis to plan out and put together policies, standard operating procedures, job descriptions, when those things need to be done, the urgency that they may have, and how they all need to come together. So policies are your plan, courses of action, and if anything that has activities or strategies. Policies help to ensure consistency, and they are the written expectations. Remember that document I keep referring to? Your policies and such, those are that documentation that were one of the first steps as far as documentation is concerned. It creates that written expectation of this is what is expected of you as an employee or of this position, whatever that case may be, and it has it there in writing. So there's no, well, that's not what you said about it or something along those lines. When we look at policies, we look at operational policies, which is across the board. And then you have departmental policies, which are specific for the individual department. So operational policies apply across the board as an umbrella to all departments, where department policies apply to that, specifically to that department. You do have to make sure that if you are doing department policies and they have an effect for other departments, make sure that the other department understands and agrees that, hey, yeah, this is what the policy is going to be. So 7.2 gives you a sample format. So you can see the policy name is in use of phones. And why is this policy there? It's to provide guidelines for cell phone use and electronic communication devices. And it applies to all operation employees present at the establishment when not on approved personal breaks. And then you see the policy statement. So if you're not on break, personal cell phones may not be used during work time, must be turned off and kept in employee locker. Exceptions for emergency purposes granted by the manager. No still or video pictures taken at any time without consent of the manager. No communication of any confidential information permitted by use of personal cell phone. And employees who violate this policy are subject to disciplinary actions based on the progressive discipline policy. So it spells out in black and white in this example what is a policy when it comes to use of phones. Now, again, the policy is in place you as the manager needs to make sure you are enforcing that policy and making sure you're enforcing it across the board to everybody at the same level, making sure you're fairly enforcing that policy as well. So you as a manager need to make sure you are familiar with these policies and that you are enforcing these policies, and that you're enforcing it fairly to everybody. Your employees need to understand that these are the policies. They need to understand what they are, and make sure that they are abiding by them as well. So standard operating procedure are descriptions on how to perform a task. So for example, a standardized recipe is a standard operating procedure. And so what you're doing when you are producing a SOP is you are looking and identifying the task, how it's done. You focus on the skills and the knowledge. You create a task list, which includes things that are done in that job. And then when you're developing that task list, make sure you're getting input from the supervisors that are supervising that area, but also from the employees themselves. And an SOP can be adjusted, and so taking into account and taking your employees and managers' opinions into account as far as these SOPs and stuff is really helpful. Plus, again, like I've said in other chapters, by involving your employees in these processes, it gives them that ownership, so they feel like they are involved in it, and it's not just something that's just being told to them that here's how it has to be done, type of thing. Some things you can do, of course, reviewing existing descriptions, a questionnaire about the job, observe work being done and compare it to what's actually done. Those are all things you can do when it comes to developing these SOPs and making the adjustments as needed. So here's a sample task list for bartender position at this cafe. So it talks about, and in detail, here are the different tasks. So inspecting the bar prior to opening, requesting additional supplies, following setup procedures, preparing garnishes, mixes, and pre-mixed drinks, greeting customers. You get the idea. You can go down the list and you can see these are the tasks that are required for that bartender position at that establishment. Now, you then need to look at task breakdowns is another one. It's part of an SOP. Some of them are pretty straightforward. I'm going to go back real quick. Some are pretty straightforward. So, you greet customers. I mean, there's some of these you can just do, individually, but then from there, you're going to need to break down even further some of these tasks. So for example, here is the service of a bottle of wine, and the theory is no matter what server presents a bottle of wine to what customer, it is done the exact same way. It's that consistency. So a customer that comes in tomorrow and orders a bottle of wine, and then they come in 3 weeks from now and order a bottle of wine, it's presented the exact same way. There's the consistency and how everything is presented. So you can see here's how this restaurant mandates as far as how a bottle of wine is open. And you can see the list. I'm not going to go through it, but it's one of those. Here it is, and each server would be required to make sure that they are doing it all the same way. Again, by doing that, you get that consistency coming into play, and it's the same way each and every time that a customer orders, no matter when they come in. So when you look at pulling it all together, so the standard operating procedure, so for example here, the policy for the standard operating procedure is all customers ordering an alcoholic beverage will be asked to show proper identification. That'll be checked through thoroughly and properly according to specific standard operating procedures. And so you see the SOP, greet the customer politely ask the customer for an ID, ask the customer to remove the ID from his or her wallet and look for signs of tampering, bubbles, creases, improper thickness, or ink signatures. Then greet the customer using the name on the ID, verify the ID by making sure it's valid, it's not been issued to a minor, it's genuine, it belongs to the customer. And if it's okay, then serve the customer. If there are concerns, seek further verification, ask for a second ID, compare the customer signature to the signature on the ID, ask the customer questions that the ID owner could answer. If it's okay, serve the customer. If it's not okay, refuse service and follow the establishment's procedure for refusal of service. So then again, there's another policy as far as refusal of service. But again, by having these out, and I know you might be thinking, oh my gosh, this is so much paperwork, so much things to write out. Welcome to management. That is part of the management side, is putting together these documents if they are not already put together, and then the enforcing of these policies and making sure that proper training is done, and that your employees are held to the standard that is being created for the establishment. And again, it's not just to give you busy work. These are policies, procedures, standard operating procedures. These are things to make sure and hopefully be that your restaurant is running as a very smooth operation and everybody is having the same experience as far as a guest is concerned, because you have these policies in place. So yes, it can be a lot of upfront work, especially if you go into an establishment that does not have any of this stuff put together, but it's going to create a different environment because of that. And it's going to make sure everybody understands what their responsibilities are, what the policies, procedures, and such are, and then what happens if you're not following those. Plus, then it gives you a benchmark as a manager to be able to evaluate your employees and how they are doing compared to what the standards are that have been set. Problem solving. Again, that's a huge thing within our industry, because day to day things are fluid. Things change. It's not the same thing every single day. And as a manager, you are going to be tasked with having to solve issues, solve problems. And, it's something that people are going to come to you for the answer. I know for a lot of you, it's kind of the other way. You go to chef or you go to your boss or whoever for an answer to something. But before you know it, people are going to be coming to you to solve the problem, to fix the problem, to take care of whatever the issue may be. And so we want to make sure you have some tools for that job. So Exhibit 7.8 is what they call a problem solving model. So it just maps out how we go about looking at it. And the thing is this is very formalized, and you don't always have the luxury of formalizing a problem solving issue, but you go through these different steps. It's just not necessarily something that you're thinking about as far as writing it down or anything like that. But you can see defining the problem, determining the cause, analyzing solution alternatives, selecting the best solution, developing a plan, implementing the plan, evaluate the results of the plan, and then of course document for future reference is the basis as far as your basic problem solving. And again, you think about it and you look at the steps, you're like, okay, that makes sense. It's what we do when we problem solve. We just don't necessarily think of it as an 8-step procedure. Well, maybe 7 steps. I don't know if you necessarily document as far as your problem solving, but you should be, especially working in the industry as a manager. So for an example, where do we get more lettuce? That can be a problem. You run out of lettuce. It's a Friday night and all of a sudden the salad station goes, we're short on lettuce, and we still got, more service going on this evening. What do you end up doing? So here's an example written out of problem solving. So step 1, define the problem. The manager has just learned that there will not be enough lettuce for tonight's dinner production. The manager recognizes 2 problems. First, why did we run out of lettuce? And what do we do right now? So the problem is pretty easy to state. There's not enough lettuce. Then we got to determine the cause. So the manager realizes that's critical to determine why we ran out of lettuce. However, it's not urgent. So that way, that can wait until we determine the second part. Remember, it's that importance and the urgency. So it's important to know why we ran out of lettuce, but it's not urgent to know why. It's important and urgent to figure out how we obtain more lettuce. Right? You see how that makes sense as far as with determining tasks and prioritizing. So the kitchen manager and the manager one have a quick conversation. They consider the alternatives. Can they call the vendor and ask them to deliver more lettuce? If it's, it might be it's too late for a delivery truck, but could the salesperson able to deliver more or less a day, which is a possibility. Send an employee to the grocery store to purchase lettuce at retail price. Send the employee to a local buyers club like Costco or Sam's Club for larger purchases. Contact a nearby unit in the restaurant chain, if it's a chain restaurant, of course, to see if that property could provide lettuce for them. Obviously, the situation is urgent, and they decide not to contact the vendor because the vendor's location is in their town. They know they can buy lettuce at a retail store or a buyer's club, and of course, the price will be lower at the buyer's club. But since it's a chain, they decide to first contact another unit in the chain, and if that's not a possibility, then they'll send an employee to the buyer's club. So, moving on to the next step. The nearby restaurant does not have enough additional lettuce, so a kitchen employee who drives a pickup truck will be sent to the buyer's club. No check or currency will be needed because the establishment has an account, and the store manager will be notified that an employee is on their way to purchase 1 case of lettuce. And so from there, the employee is asked to go to the buyer's club, told that he will be paid $15 from the petty cash fund to reimburse for gas. So for those of you not familiar, petty cash fund is a predetermined amount of money that's used to make infrequent and low cost purchases for an establishment. It's that emergency money type thing. The employee then leaves for the buyer's club. The manager calls the buyer's club, and the kitchen manager makes different assignments so food production can continue until the lettuce arrives, as far as any prep and stuff is concerned. So you can see all these, it's all written out here for us, but it's things that you would just be doing. You just don't necessarily think about okay, step 6, the employee is going to the buyer's club. The manager's calling the buyer. It just happens. It's not something you necessarily think about in a written format. So the problem's been corrected. The manager evaluates the solution, see if it is successful. The result on lettuce stock levels, costs, and any time spent are then evaluated in the end, because you might be cheaper, but maybe not as cheap as ordering. So that's a cost issue. What are our stock levels? Why is it where it's at? And then the next morning, you can see the kitchen manager, operation manager meets to determine why they ran out of lettuce. Purchasing, inventory management, issuing, and food preparation activities are all analyzed. They discover that 2 cases had been marked with the wrong date when they were received, so they were not issued in the order they were received. Cases were later thrown away by a kitchen employee when he noticed the case content did not meet the quality requirements. Actions taken to resolve the problem include reminding all employees that no food can be thrown away, even if spoiled, without notifying the kitchen manager. So that's in that example, how it came about. But again, at the end, you always want to make sure you are analyzing, and then especially if there's a big issue like that, why did it happen? And then make sure there's documentation as to what's going on and how it came about. So, even something as simple as this example here, like, okay, we ran out of lettuce. How do we go about doing it? That just gives you an idea as far as the steps into problem solving. Like I said, it's not something we think about as in steps. It's just we work our way through these. Anytime we solve a problem, we just don't necessarily think of it from an 8-step standpoint that way. So some reporting tools. So things on a daily basis that a manager should be using. It doesn't always happen though. So one is a manager daily log. What a daily log is, not only is it a record of things that happen that are out of the ordinary, but it's also a way for managers to communicate, because it may be that it's the sous chef that does the log, that evening, but then it's the chef that comes in the next day. And if he or she, if they have not communicated with the sous chef yet, Maybe they might be, okay, what's going on, or why did this happen? By creating this daily log, it allows communication to happen between management and also keep a record. So, for example, you see for this example, this one employee left an hour early at 1. Somebody saw a mouse near table 10 just before closing, but no guest noticed, left a message with the pest control. Please call him in the morning to check when he's coming. Says, Spartans, whoever the local team is, won the playoffs, need to add staff for series home games on these dates. Freezer number 3 went down overnight. Food was at the right temperature, and it was transferred to number 4 freezer. Everything was labeled and logged in HACCP. Scheduled service for the day with the refrigeration company. Had a very busy dinner rush, 163 covers. Staff did a great job. Funeral luncheon scheduled for Saturday. Estimate 50 to 60 guests. Maria and Peter agreed to stay late that day. Left messages for Dwayne and Frida asking them to work. So you can see it's a great and simple way to communicate. I mean, this one you can see the example is just done on lined paper, but you could do it through a Google Drive, or you can, do it in some other form that makes sure that managers have access to it. It allows everyone to know what's going on and, what the expectations or things that they should be doing once they get into the office for that day. So again, something really simple like that. But again, it's about that communication and that documentation. The other side to it is if you have incidents. So this is an example of a critical incident report. And so this is for an emergency, an accident, or something that could be, what it says, could lead to a liability. Make sure you gather all the information. So these are another thing that if, it can be if there was an accident in the kitchen, whether it's customer or employee related. There is an incident as far as any, problems with customers, things like that. Want to fill these out again. So you have that documentation if it needs to come back, to that. So in this example, has an accident happen? What was the nature of it? What happened? When did it happen? What else was going on at the same time? So being detailed as possible. Was there any medical attention needed and given? And if yes, who was involved? What did they do? Where was somebody taken? Were there witnesses? Yes or no? If yes, and we can get their information for contact if need be. What did they see happen? Was security or police called? What actions were taken? Were there any unusual conditions? What was the nature of the accident? Was work lost? Was insurance claims filed? Was workers' compensation filed? Or do you think it's going to be filed? And again, it's one of those when those things happen, not if, when those things happen, that you have documentation, you're following up on, hey, these are situations that happen that we need to be aware of. We have our documents of here's how this had went, at least in my version of everything. So some things you might find is emergency types. So there are some different types of restaurant food service emergencies. Of course, fire is one, foodborne illness, armed robbery, gas leaks, even terrorist attacks and natural disasters are some different emergency types that we might have to deal with. And so these give you some different tips, tricks, things to be thinking about when it comes to any of these possible scenarios that could potentially happen, and things that you should be taking into consideration when it comes to if those situations do occur. With a lot of those emergency situations, emergency plans are a good thing to have. What that's going to do is it's a written document that determines how we react to certain things. Just like when you were in school and you had the fire drill and tornado drills and all that fun stuff, there was a written plan, and here's how we're going to handle if it's a fire, if it's a tornado. Same basic principle a lot of times applies that you should for your establishment. What happens if a fire breaks out at your restaurant, or what happens if it's a tornado warning that goes off while people are dining in your restaurant. You should have those emergency plans written out to respond to those types of emergencies. So the plan should include the roles and responsibilities of who are involved, how information is shared, a requirement. This is a big one. We don't think about it, but a requirement that news media be referred to a specific contact person. And what that means, a big thing, is employees should never speak on behalf of the organization unless that person is the contact person, because you want to make sure that it's the right message going out, it's the same message going out, and that everyone's on the same page. It doesn't mean that employees cannot speak on behalf of themselves, if asked, but they need to understand that they do not speak on behalf of the college. It's not an emergency thing, but even like here at ICC, if I was contacted by the news media for a question that's related to the college, for the Culinary Arts Institute or anything like that, even though the Culinary Arts Institute is part of my job, I need to first refer them to our marketing department and to our person that's in charge of PR. That's who they go to first. I refer them to them. And then depending on exactly what they're looking for, then the person that does the PR and marketing and stuff for the college that takes care of all that point person can then loop me into what's going on if it's something that I need to be involved in. But it's one of those, as far as college policy, is I don't speak on behalf of the college unless they go to the marketing department first, and then I'm looped into it. And so that's something that you want to make sure that, it's something that is part of what you have is, make sure there's who is the person that they go to as far as for the news media, and make sure the employees understand that if they're asked questions about the restaurant and, they are not the official spokesperson for the restaurant, that they need to refer them to whoever that contact person is. Okay? Also need to have in the plans who's responsible for the paperwork, and also plans for training of emergencies for everybody. So again, those tornado drills, those fire drills, things like that, how do you go about doing training for your employees for these situations? Okay? Other things is, if there's an evacuation that needs to be done as part of the emergency plan, what are the roles and responsibilities for evacuating plans? Making sure that's in writing and part of the training. So if there's a fire that happens, who is responsible for what when it comes to getting them out? You should have certain people that are responsible for making sure the customers are out, making sure that everybody is gone through, that there's nobody that's left in the building while things are going on. Things like that you want to be taking into consideration of who, and then again, not necessarily names of people, but those positions and who's responsible for those. And of course, a contact list is always a good thing to have too. And a lot of times you want to have them next to every phone. So if you have an emergency contact that you need, so they have the chef's phone, the sous chef's phone, the front of the house manager's phone, et cetera, by the business phones, in case that there needs to be a call to that management, you have it easily accessible, so people are not going, where do I find somebody's number? Those are always good tips and tricks to have. Again, media policy, like I already said, but we should have a written media policy so all employees know how to address or not address the media, like I said earlier. Most of the time, employees are usually not allowed to address the media as representatives of the business unless that's part of their job. And a lot of times the reason for the media there dictates who is the point person. And maybe the point person is you as the chef, because it's a food question, or it could be the bar manager if it's a bar, if it's an alcohol or a drink question. So sometimes the point person is not necessarily always the same. If you are one that you are talking as a representative of the establishment, again, remember keeping comments brief and keeping them on the positive. Especially if you're having to make comments because of a fire or goodness gracious, knock on wood, if there's an issue of food poisoning or something like that, and you are the person that has to speak as a representative of the restaurant or the establishment, comments, keep them brief and keep them on the positive when it comes to those things. And then, of course, it's a little tongue in cheek, more on paperwork. The biggest thing with paperwork is documentation is the key to everything. And if you notice, everything is in capital letters and bolded because, again, I beat y'all like a dead horse with it when it comes to that information. But document. Make sure there's always documentation for things that are going on. If it's not documented, did it actually happen is always the question. So, day-to-day operations, there's a lot of different things that fall on your plate. Making sure that policies and standard operating procedures are being adhered to, putting out proverbial fires as far as your tasks and what things need to be prioritized where on a daily basis, making sure that employees are doing their jobs and that you're managing by walking around and that they are following the standards of the establishment that have been put together. A lot of those things come into play, but in the end, by having those ducks in a row, having those policies and stuff in place, it makes your job smoother in that you have policies to fall back on when there comes questions and stuff when it comes to what's going on within your establishment.